We're about to hear about speed and innovation at the Washington Post, how technology has been used at that brand to move forward the business, and how Washington Post has changed its publishing infrastructure and processes, and how you can do the same. And to tell us exactly how we can, please welcome the head of sales and product at the ARC project, Matt Monahan. He's there.
Thanks. The clicker.
It should be on there.
It's up there. Hey everybody, good to see you guys today. So I'm Matt Monahan. I've worked at the Washington Post now for about 6 or 7 years. At the Post, I run product for ARC Publishing, which is basically our in-house CMS project. And then I have a bunch of experience with the rest of the business. I'll talk a little bit about what's happening at the Post right now, some major trends that we're trying to address. And then I'll talk a little bit about how inside the products that we build, we're trying to solve some of those problems. And I think looking at the list of things that were discussed today, obviously some of this will be topical. Number one, just for folks who haven't kind of caught up on the Washington Post lately, a lot's changed since 7 or 8 years ago. I have a picture there of our old building with the printing press out in front. We were like a lot of newspaper publishers, right? We were an old-fashioned regional newspaper publisher that you walked in the front door and the first thing you saw was a printing press. And so I think that even the building says a lot about what's changed. Lots of paper, lots of people typing things out. We're in a much more modern location now. Really, though, the big thing that's changed has been our approach to how we solve kind of some of the bigger problems that all of us are facing right now. So the biggest thing I think that's changed has to do with technology and how we employ it at the Post. This seems like kind of maybe one of those gimmicky marketing slides that a lot of people have. Oh, we're going to be a tech publisher. We're going to succeed at journalism. We're going to succeed at technology. But for us, this is really strategically important. So one of the big changes that we've made at the Post has been when it comes to hiring, when it comes to strategic direction, we have to think of ourselves as a technology company. So it's not enough to just say we're going to build a tech team that can aid our journalists in doing their work. We legitimately think of ourselves as a technology and an engineering company. It's really important. And what it does is it enables us to do things like this. So when we think about what our direction should be in addressing, for instance, new social media platforms that arise, or new areas we can be publishing our content, we actually take a pretty iterative approach to it. With that quality technology team in place, what it enables us to do is engage in this constant cycle of experimentation. And so again, this seems kind of light on detail, but it's a really, really important concept because it's difficult to do, especially inside of a lot of newspaper companies. Most newspaper companies want to do things very carefully, plan out their direction. For us, the most important thing to be able to do is to design experiments. And you'll see inside some of our tools, when I go into the specifics, how this pervades everything that we do inside the Washington Post. Ideally, our research team is spending a lot of time thinking about what we see in the marketplace, what we see our consumers doing. For instance, with digital subscriptions, what are the trends that we see in people adopting subscriptions and purchasing them? And then what experiments can we conduct? Right? So rather than trying to plan it out carefully, we spend a lot of time thinking about what kind of experiments could we design and have as many going as possible, get the data back, and then constantly improve. Subscriptions, editorial content, our workflow, advertising, this cycle of experimentation and then analysis drives everything that we do at the Post. And the results for us have been very, very positive, right? So even 4 or 5 years ago, we were basically a quarter of the size that we are today. And so what's true is basically in that period of time, we've transformed ourselves into a company that's both a technology and a journalism company. And 2, we've transformed ourselves from a regional newspaper into a national and international publisher. And so let me show you kind of some of the trends that we're looking at right now and some of the tools that are behind it. So first of all, the fight against fake news. This is obviously very topical for us at the Washington Post. Being based in Washington, D.C., it's top of mind. And I won't talk too much about, obviously, the specifics of fake news. I think everyone here is probably familiar enough with that. But I'll talk a little bit about some of the specific things that we're doing to try to address it. So one thing we can talk about is Google's Trust Project, which is pretty interesting. The goal here is basically improve media literacy among the general public. So everyone who's sitting here knows the news industry really well. Everyone probably knows the difference between news desks and editorial, right, and opinion. Most of the reading public doesn't. They have no idea what the difference between a a column or an opinion article is and a news article, right? We did a lot of research on this. We find people have no idea. It makes it very easy for someone to point to a column or opinion article and say, oh, that's fake news. The same goes for our reporters. I think in the past, we didn't spend a lot of time trying to let the public know about how well credentialed our reporters are, about the workflow that is required for them to publish stories. They don't understand that in news organizations, research is required to publish, that facts need to be verified by fact checkers, that it goes through a copy desk. So we spend some time trying to inform them about that, and you can see some of the specifics of what we do here. Here, for instance, we capture data about how our stories go through the editorial workflow and then what type of story they are. It's not just as simple as kind of a piece of metadata. We actually collect information, too, about how long the story stops at each stop in the editorial workflow. How long does the story spend at the copy desk? How long does it spend with the fact checker? And then we capture all that information, and we can actually start to share it with our readers. So you see here, we let them know very proactively on our homepage, on section fronts, on our article templates, what kind of story is this, and we call it out very drastically. Same thing goes with our reporters. We call out what title they are. We give them kind of very prominent pages where you can kind of see their picture. We spent a lot of time, even on things as small as, like, for instance, the image that we use for our reporters, making sure they're all very standardized, professionally done headshots. We list what university they went to, where they were credentialed. We find that actually has a really big impact on our readers in helping them understand that there's a difference between us and content marketing or opinion content. And then what we're actually doing with Google is by feeding them some of this information, they can use some of that metadata to basically say, you guys are a quality publisher versus a content marketer, and they'll actually surface you more prominently in search results. So overall, it's a pretty interesting trend. There's some technology behind it, too, that's part of ARC. And we think, hopefully, it's helping our readers understand our unique value versus kind of some of our competitors who might otherwise try to aggregate our content and remove some of the important facts. All right, so another lens that is kind of useful to look at that we always think about when we're doing experiments on our site, it's depth versus breadth, which to us kind of looks like this. Now, these are just examples, but whenever we're designing kind of experiments or thinking about how we want to portray our news content to our readers, we always think about these two axes. And the idea is this. On the one hand, you have just broad reach. This is us trying to grow the top of the funnel, grow our reach among English-speaking audience in the US and actually around the world. And then on the other axis, you have immersiveness. Now, the reality is, if you look at something like VR or AR, these are still relatively early technologies, right? Like, VR is probably still a little bit away from, like, full commercial adoption. Augmented reality, you can see inside our mobile app for the Washington Post, but at the same time, it's not something that's highly used by most of our users. But what we do know is that those are extremely engaging content types, and our most engaged users are actually the most likely to visit them. So we have to kind of do both things. We have to be able to reach all of our readers, right, on social media, on search, with articles, with galleries, with videos. And we also need to experiment with new content types that will allow us to go a little bit deeper, especially with our most engaged users. And especially the things at the top of that kind of immersiveness scale wind up being very good content for your subscribers, people who are coming back 5 or 10 times a day. Now, when it comes to breadth, it's not just on your own site. There's an implication there. If you really want to grow the top of your funnel from a subscription perspective and just your audience in general, it means engaging fully with all the platforms that are available to you. And I know this can be somewhat controversial, right? Because each of these platforms comes with some limitations. There's certain risks, in some cases, to playing fully with them. And something we're aware of, too. Having said that, if you go back to the idea that we had before about experimentation and measurement, our idea with most of these partners is that it's not a one-way door. We have this idea of like a one-way door versus a two-way door. If you can design an experiment with a partner like Facebook or like Google, and if the experiment doesn't work out, you can just go back to where you were before, there's no harm in conducting that experiment. And so for us, if it's a question of offering subscriptions through Apple News or advertising through Facebook Instant, we'll always experiment fully, meaning with pretty much all of our content on that platform, to try to find out how successful could it possibly be for us. And in some cases, we stick with it. In other cases, we pull back. Some kind of real specific examples of this. Snapchat is a good one. In this case, there's really not a revenue story here for us. As a matter of fact, it costs us a bit of money to produce content specifically for Snapchat. This is a branding story, right? This is about us reaching an audience that traditionally we haven't been able to reach, getting them acquainted with the Washington Post brand, and hopefully they become kind of the next generation for readers and subscribers for us. Another good example is Apple News. This one, the advertising story is not as strong, but it's a great subscription story. Especially, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but on your device, if you kind of swipe to the left, there's the left of home screen. That drives a ton of traffic. And in this case, we don't really limit the content that we send to Apple News. We send pretty much all of it. So the story here is all about subscriptions, and we find that the product experience on Apple devices is so good and so highly engaged by users that it's completely worth it to be there, even if it takes away a little bit from the experience that we have on our own website. And then I put this as an example of something that is probably still a little bit early, but maybe is a little bit further along, the consumer adoption path than something like AR or VR. Just right now, kind of home automation and voice technologies are beginning to become prominent. So whether it's Google's product, whether it's Alexa, this is an area that we're investing more and more heavily in now. Now this one's expensive. You have to produce content that's specific for it. It's not enough, I don't think, to say, let's just take our articles, record an audio clip of them, and put them on this device. If you really want to be successful on something like Alexa, you have to spend some time engaging in the unique content types that they have there. For instance, their news briefings. So again, it's still relatively early, but from the perspective of our newsroom, we're basically conducting all these different experiments on each platform, trying to take advantage of the unique benefits that come with each, and grow our audience as much as possible. But I think the bottom line, and I always show this slide to kind of explain, this old image that probably a lot of folks have in their advertising sales deck, right, with the phone and the tablet and the watch, this is table stakes. This is the bare minimum these days, right? Of course you need to be on mobile devices. Of course you need to be on tablet. You need a native app. You need a responsive website. But what we're seeing is that if we really want to grow our audience, this isn't enough. This is just the bare minimum that consumers expect now. Talk a little bit about digital subscriptions. Now, how many folks, I imagine a lot of people in the audience are probably investigating or reinvestigating digital subscriptions today. I think it's sort of a new opportunity for publishers to look at this space. Probably the reality is consumers, by using a lot of other products like Netflix or Spotify or Hulu, their likelihood to buy digital subscriptions, through whether like the Apple Store or just entering to a platform's website directly, has increased dramatically over the last 3 or so years. And so, for us, especially in the past year, we've seen adoption of our subscription products go way up. Obviously, the news situation in Washington, D.C. also makes that a little bit more likely. But the thing I want to point out here is not kind of what makes consumers likely to subscribe to your content. What we found from this, and this goes back to our cycle of experimentation and A/B testing, what we found is that it's not enough to have the content or to have the product that you offer. If you look back maybe 4 or 5 years ago at how we were doing digital subscriptions at the Post, it was a highly fragmented product offering. It was a really confusing pricing scheme that we had for our products. We were really worried about cannibalization of our print product and what would happen if we offered a digital product, and would people unsubscribe from print because they wanted to subscribe to digital. In order to be successful in this space, what we found is we needed to make it simple for our consumers, and we tested this extensively. What we finally ended with, and actually I think it's a little bit different now than even what I have in the screenshot there, but we've dramatically simplified our digital product offering. And if you think about it as a consumer, you're accustomed to this now, right? If you go to any of the major platforms, they don't have a confusing product offering where the prices aren't quite even and you're not sure how much it's actually going to cost you. It's very, very simple. For us here, you can see it's monthly or annual, all access digital or home delivery. We now have the idea of a premium digital product where you can share it with family members. So we do kind of basic digital, premium digital. But that's it. We keep it very, very simple. And then we obviously present it in a very simple way for our readers as well. So if you think about the consumer funnel for digital subscriptions, so this is kind of starting towards the top of the funnel, when you finally start to present your offer to readers. How simple is it for them to understand? Can they comprehend what your products are? Do they understand how much it's going to cost them? Or do they come in and do they get very confused? We made sure to solve that problem. And you have to imagine inside each one of these little things, we're doing extensive A/B testing and content testing. All the calls to action, the buttons, all the presentation of this, the naming of the products, the pricing has all been subject to quite a bit of testing. So now go kind of a level down in the funnel. Starting with the products, now you're starting to engage users and you want to basically get them to subscribe. I think our old way of doing this would have been you simply throw up a paywall and make them pay, right? They can't read the article anymore. They hit their 5-page views or 10-page views or however many you have. For the post right now, it's 3. They hit their limit and then you present them with the paywall. What we found is mostly that annoys our readers. They're in the middle of reading an article and you've just interrupted them. And sometimes it takes a little bit more engagement to pull them into the funnel, to convince them to become a subscriber of your product. And so the way that we do this, I think we probably have about a dozen different ways, but I put a couple of examples up here. One way is on the left, rather than just presenting them with the paywall and making them sign up, they can either subscribe for $1, so they get a promo offer. They don't have to pay the full price at first. And it's a really simple purchase workflow. We don't try to get a lot of data from them. We try to make it very simple. Or on the kind of left side of that left picture, you can see we actually just ask them for their email. And the idea behind this is, rather than trying to present them with the call to action right then, perhaps we can pull them kind of deeper into our brand without yet trying to get them to pay. We can, for instance, get them signed up for an email newsletter, which number one, delivers them some value. And we have some pretty good curated email-like newsletters that we put against that. Number two, enables us to start marketing to them more aggressively. We can start sending emails out, slowly building a relationship with them, eventually resulting in trying to get them to convert. And then on the right, you can see kind of just a different presentation of the same thing. In this case, it's actually even easier, right? Rather than having them just enter their email address manually, we can get them to OAuth in with Facebook or Google. We have a couple of variations with that. There's one with Amazon, for instance. So with one click, it goes, it lets them sign in using Facebook or Amazon login. Now, once again, we have their email address, and we can begin marketing to them. So thinking about what happens at the middle of the funnel, I think, is pretty important, too. And then finally here, purchasing from the paywall. You have to make sure that purchase workflow is very, very simple. Consumers are already accustomed to one-click purchase, for instance, from Amazon. So, if your purchase workflow involves asking for a whole bunch of fields of data because, your CRO says, well, we need to collect, what's their profession and what's their age and what's their salary range, because in the end, a lot of consumers will abandon. And if you subject it to testing, you'll probably find that's true. The value that you'll get out of just getting the people to subscribe now and eventually collect that data from them later is far greater than trying to force to collect all that data at the beginning and just having them abandoned in the middle of the purchase workflow. And so behind all of these capabilities that you see are the tools that we've built as part of ARC. The paywall, the rendering system that we use for the transparency project, the tools that we're using inside the newsroom for writing stories is all part of kind of the ARC publishing project that we've been providing for ourselves at the Washington Post and now for other publishers. And the stuff that we're focused on this year, which I think is pretty cool, is technologies for speed and automation inside the newsroom. And I know I'm running short on time. I'll just show you a couple of examples. The big thing that we're using this year to kind of frame the way that we think of this problem is the idea of lead measurements versus lag measurements. And so the idea behind this is that, rather than traditional analytics reports that you have where you're showing kind of the results of audience on your site the day after it happens. It's the analytics report that arrives in your email or your inbox rather the next day or at the end of the week or at the end of the month. What we're trying to do is drive what we think of as lead measurements, where we can actually influence the results before they happen. So if you think, for instance, inside our newsroom, we write about 450 staff-written stories a day. It's a large amount of content. Traditionally, we didn't have a lot of measurement around that workflow and around kind of how people produced that content, how long it took them, what desks took the longest with it, where there were bottlenecks in the process. And so we've started to kind of basically identify measurements around these things where we can try to influence the results of that process. So just to put it in concrete terms, here, for instance, is a chart in our newsroom of when stories are being published throughout the day against our audience curve for that same day. Right? And the idea of this is, in a traditional newsroom, many reporters are publishing actually very late in the day. If we identify this trend early on in the day, say by noon, we can actually push on those reporters to publish earlier in the day and actually boost our results. And so technologies like this are things that we're actually building all the time in our newsroom as part of ARC to try to basically increase our results even as the day is going on. Another example of this is we actually have a virality predictor. We can predict when a story is going to go viral and then let the reporters and the editors know so they can go back and actually do extra production work on that story, or maybe add an image to it, or write the headline a little bit better to try to basically increase the traffic that would come to those stories before it's too late for it to be topical. And you can see, actually, if we can actually predict pretty well which ones will go viral, which gives the editors a huge advantage. And we can actually help them out by automatically suggesting better headlines for them to write for these stories. The kind of headlines that we suggest aren't typically the ones that we would just automatically produce into the story, but it actually helps the editors in choosing new variants of headlines that they could use, so that if you put it all together, if they know a story is about to go viral, if you give them some suggestions of different headlines they could use for that story, and then if you couple it with a testing technology to say, let's try to choose the very best one and drive more traffic to the story through that winning headline, those few things together basically allow you to increase traffic to that article before the day is through. Here's another example. These 3 tests right here, 3 different headlines. You can see we're basically able to triple the click-through rate to that article by testing several different headlines against it. And by using an automated headline technology, we can actually suggest some of these to reporters who might not have otherwise thought of it. So I'll wrap up now. I'll skip to the end of this one. And so looking forward to this year, the things that we're basically focused on including inside ARC include a new paywall subscriptions product, which was something that we traditionally used inside the Post. The capabilities that you just saw that I was talking about earlier for payment methods and testing different products are now being included inside of ARC. Multi-site capabilities for publishers that run kind of a whole chain of publications to be able to operate templates and editorial workflow and content syndication together. And then the analytics that I was just talking about, both editorial workflow analytics as well as content engagement analytics. Finally, an editorial calendar for planning inside your newsroom. So that's it. I don't know, is there a Q&A at the end?
I'm afraid we're pushed up against it, so I'm sure you'll be around for a few more minutes if people want to get you in the, next break. That'd be good. Okay, thank you very much.